Good evening, everyone. We are excited to taste some mezcal tonight. I am Vadim Perlovsky with the Virtual Tasting Society, and today we have Jennifer Oakley with Del Maguey. Is it Del Maguey? Del Maguey?
Del Maguey, you nailed it.
Del Maguey mezcal, single village origins, right? You do single villages, right? So each mezcal is made by a different village, and you get to. It's really an experience of terroir. You really get to taste flavor and place. So we're super excited to welcome another mezcal to our what once started as a whiskey and bourbon group has now expanded to be other spirits, and we're super excited to taste Del Maguey. I got a sneak peek, and I was blown away at how delicious these spirits are. Everyone that's in this group, in this room today, I'm sure knows how amazing mezcal can be. So, and if you don't, you're about to find out. Looks like David's not on the call. John, are you there? Mr. Lakers championship.
I'm here, guys. Hey, sorry, I was just eating some dinner real quick. But yeah, I can say a few words in David's absence if you want me to do that.
Go for it.
Cool. So just want to say welcome. Is it, by the way, is it Del Maguey or Del Maguey?
Del Maguey.
Maguey.
Del Maguey. Okay, cool. Just wanted to clarify that. We just want to say welcome you guys tonight. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you so much for hosting this with us tonight. Unfortunately, I don't have the samples with me. I didn't get them in time for Vadim. I'm looking forward to tasting this at a different time when I pick up my kit. But just wanted to say, on behalf of our group, thank you so much for being here and taking your time out of your busy schedule to show us the world of your mezcals. And again, when I get them, super excited to try them. But admittedly, I haven't tried any yet, and I'm super excited to hear what you have to say about it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, John. It looks like everybody here is a regular. I think maybe one or two new faces. Essentially, get nerdy, participate in the chat, ask questions. That's why we're here. You're not watching TV. You're here for a masterclass of sorts. If you have questions, please ask them. We're here to participate. This is not a one-way show. This is a two-way conversation. Keep yourself on mute unless you're speaking, just so we don't get background noise and overlap. But feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as necessary. Other than that, enjoy your samples. And I'm excited to introduce Jennifer. Jennifer is the wonderful brand ambassador for the West. Do you control the West Coast, or are you more than just West Coast?
Pretty much, yeah. Southwest and the West Coast, yeah.
Awesome. So Southwest.
Thank you.
You are the Juez.
Juez. J-U-E-Z. It means judge.
Okay. So tell us more about that.
I'll explain. Sure. So yeah, I'm the Juez for Del Maguey Single Village Mezcal. If you're at a party in Oaxaca, there's always a designated Juez. It's the Juez's job to keep everybody's copitas full of mezcal. So that's what I do. I mainly do education and outreach for the brand. I do things like this. So I appreciate the warm welcome. Thank you all so much for having me. And I'm super excited. Is there anything that we need to talk about, Vadim, before I have a slideshow so we can see some pictures and everything. Is there anything we need to go over before we launch into that?
No, I think, so I mentioned the participation and everything. I will say, we talked earlier, if anybody's joining in last minute. So the samples we're tasting today are Vida, Las Milpas, San Luis del Rio, Minero, and Wild Papalome, or at least that's the way I have them labeled. We are pouring as we go. So I know people always ask, so we're going to pour as we go because our copitas do tend to be thirsty, so they will drink it by the time we get to it. Don't trust those. And you will talk about the order in a little bit, so don't freak out. But other than that, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to share my screen with you all. Del Maguey, Single Village Mezcal. We have about 20 different expressions. This is sort of just, an example. That's my name and my title. We always start here. So the thing to know about Del Maguey Single Village Mezcal is that we don't make mezcal. We buy it from producers in remote villages in and around Oaxaca. So I think of Ron Cooper, who is our Phoenix. Ron Cooper is the curator, and these are the artists that he has selected to feature. So we refer to this as liquid art. Ron Cooper started this brand in 1995. This is the first artisanal mezcal here on the U.S. market. He's sort of been credited as being sort of the godfather of the artisanal mezcal movement, because he really brought the stories of these families and this tradition to the United States, to the forefront here. Just a quick note as we begin to taste. Anytime you drink, I hear y'all regulars, you know how to taste, but particularly for mezcal, because it is so high proof, I would recommend always keeping your lips parted a little bit, because as you smell it, so it can help that alcohol dissipate a bit. And I always say 2 sips. The first sip, you're going to kind of coat your mouth, get your taste buds ready to go. The second sip is where you're going to really start to kind of dissect what you're tasting. So that's a copita. You all have your copitas. This is our Zapotec Coast. Because the indigenous people in Oaxaca obviously don't speak Spanish, they speak different forms of the Nahuatl language, which is the indigenous language there. We use one from the Zapotec language. We say Sijibeyo. So if you wouldn't mind just pouring a little bit of Vita into your copita, save some for later when we get to it, but we always like to start with mezcal, because mezcal is something that we have, that people drink when they're gathered together, which even virtually, which is what we're doing now. So please pour a little in your copita and join me for a toast. And if we're all, I'm watching a few of you. Fiji Bayu, so in most, in pretty much any culture, the toast is usually about health, right? We say salud, pros, all these things, to your health. And it's no different with Fiji Bayu, but it's much bigger than that. Fiji Bayu, in short, means to your health, to the health of your family, to Mother Earth, and to our connectedness. To our ancestors. So Fiji Bayu, everyone, thank you so much for having me. Okay, so let that kind of linger. We're going to talk about that one in a few minutes. I was just talking about indigenous language. So the word mezcal comes from one of these Nahuatl words, basically from the combination of the words for agave and kush. We're going to get into that in a few minutes. This is a map of Mexico. Like champagne for wine, how champagne has to be from Champagne, France, made in a certain way. That's it being from Champagne is a geographical denomination of origin or appellation of origin. So the same applies to mezcal. There's a DO. There are currently 9 states that can produce mezcal in the country of Mexico. So when you look at this map, the yellow states are the ones that can produce mezcal. There are currently 5 states that can produce tequila. There are 9 that can produce mezcal, and there are a few that can produce both. So when you see those sort of nice straight lines between the blue and the yellow, or even the green and the yellow there, those are states that do produce both. But the main one that we're going to be talking about is the state of Oaxaca on the southern end there. There's a very long history of mezcal production in this region, and mezcals from Oaxaca it's a great opportunity for varying flavor profiles, because geographically Oaxaca is really varied. It has high mountains, low valleys, all different kinds of microclimates, everything in between. And mezcal is very terroir driven, which we're going to get into. But this is why Oaxaca is such an amazing state for mezcal production. I'm going to kind of slide through these next few pictures because these are just going to be a few images of different kinds of agaves. I've already talked about champagne, right? I talk about mezcal the same way that I talk about wine. If I am here in this restaurant, I'm going to look at the list and order a glass of wine. The first thing I usually look at is, what is the grape? What is the varietal, or is it a blend? And it's the same thing with mezcal, because this is what, part of the beauty of this product. There are over 200 different species of agave. And technically, you can make mezcal out of any of those. By definition, mezcal is any distillate of the agave plant. And this really is different from tequila, because tequila can only be blue weather, but mezcal can technically be any agave. And like grapes for wine, each agave has sort of its own defining characteristics as far as flavor profile goes. But I just wanted to show you visually a few different kinds of agave. This is a Tobola. There are some Karwinskis. This is the Jabalí. This is Arteño. This is Tepiscate, kind of weird and twisty. This is Blue Weber, which you can probably tell by the tone of this image. And then we get into Esparin. You can probably tell it looks pretty similar to the Blue Weber image that we just saw. And that is because Esparin, which is the most commonly used agave variety for mezcal, is the genetic mother to the Blue Weber agave for tequila. But you can also see here that all of these agaves, even though they're in the same field, they're really different in size, right? And that's because what we're looking at with Esparin for mezcal is we're really trying to avoid sort of like the monoculture that has developed in some areas of Mexico for Blue Weber. So these plants, they grow, some producers and farmers say that they're like people, that, you know, they all grow at their own rate, and some are old souls in like a young body, and some are really big, but they're not mature. So that's another great thing about this spirit, is like when you taste this, you're tasting the life cycle of this plant. And these, you know, Espadina is the most commonly used agave for mezcal because A, it's delicious. It kind of is a chameleon. It will really take things on. But B, it's efficient. Bare minimum, Espadin takes 7 to 12 years to reach maturity. That is very different from grapes for wine, or grain for whiskey, or sugarcane for rum. But in the world of mezcal, that's actually really short. Okay, we're going to get into production here. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat to see if there's anything I need to check on here. Okay, so we're going to get into production. The roast. This is really important in mezcal production, because before this, we're looking at it just like the way we look at tequila, right? They harvest the agave, they cut off the pencas or the leaves, and then they're left with the piña, or the heart of the agave. You can tell here that, you know, hopefully it's pretty obvious they call it a piña, because once you cut off the leaves, it looks like a pineapple. But this is what we're going to cook and then lead to fermentation and distillation. So our full title is Del Maguey, which means of the agave, Del Maguey Single Village Mezcal. The Single Village Mezcal part of our title is what's really important, because we use something we call it Single Village Methodology. And that's just, you know, all, again, with wine, all the words that we use when we talk about wine: terroir, what is the microclimate, what's the soil, what is the elevation, hand of the maker, what does this house do that's different than the next one? All of these things that we talk about when we talk about wine translates directly to mezcal. And so we've already harvested from wherever, you know, we've already harvested the plants from wherever they're growing. This next step, where they build a fire at the bottom of their conical roasting pit, that's usually about 6 feet deep and 12 feet across. They're going to, I think it's, oh, somebody's looked up. Okay, so I'm gonna answer this question really quickly. What type of a plant is agave? Is it cacti or is it a succulent? It was actually previously thought to be part of the lily family, but we now know it's actually in the asparagus family, which is very interesting. So no, asparagus. So they're going to build a fire at the bottom of this roasting pit with local wood. The local wood is important. I think about it the way I think about American barbecue, right? The wood matters because they have different flavors, they emit different amounts of smoke. So they're going to harvest whatever wood is surrounding them, and they're going to put it at the bottom of their roasting pit, and they're going to light it on fire. And then they're going to take volcanic rock, and they're going to stack it on top of that fire that's, you know, made with local wood. And then they might use a layer of bagasso here, the stuff that sort of looks like wet hay. That is agave fibers from previous distillations. They never waste anything. Everything is always reused. This is one way to use bagasso. And then they're going to stack their agave into this pit. And you can see there's kind of like smoke rising up to the middle. Then they're going to bury the entire thing using dirt or rocks or palm mats, whatever is the style of that particular village. And they often will stick a cross in the top of their pit to bless the roast. There's a lot, you know, as far as time and money goes with that agave in this pit, there's a lot of money in there. So they make sure that they bless it along the way. So this means that the agave is going to be in there, and it's going to absorb all that smoke and roast and earth. And this is what gives mezcal its sort of definitive smoky character that we all know and love about it. But I hope with this tasting, you see that you'll taste that, you know, not all mezcal is just super smoky. That's really one part of a host of other different characteristics. How are we doing so far? Any questions? Any comments so far? We all good? Okay, I'll go on. And to echo Vadim, like, it is a small group. So if I don't see if you put something in the chat and I don't see it immediately, feel free just to say, Jen, you know, if something doesn't make sense, just let me know and we'll talk about it. So this is what the agave looks like after it's been pulled out of the roast. It's dark now, it's caramelized, it's sweet. If you were to take a piece of this and chew on it, it's super sweet, which is good because sugar means alcohol, right? This is what we want. So after we've roasted our agaves, the next step is milling. So we have these big roasted agaves. We need to break them down into smaller pieces. So there's a couple of different traditional ways of doing that. And I mentioned traditional because the history of mezcal goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. This is an ancient spirit. It has so much, it's so wrapped into the culture of these people. So, we think of distillation today as developing in what is modern day Pakistan, but there's new evidence that Oaxaca distillation in this region may even predate that. So my point is they have been doing this for a very, very long time. And often a lot of these palenques, vocab word, a palenque, which is the site of distillation, and the palenqueros, which is the producer, often they're producing as ancestrally as possible. So this is the first style of traditional milling. This is called a molino. You may recognize it. They call it a tahona in tequila, but you have a big stone wheel that you attach to a mule or a horse, and they will walk that mule or horse around in a circle and throw agave underneath the wheel, and it will crush it as it goes around. That's one option. The second option here is milling by batch or by hand. You can see in the front there, those sort of big, we call them bats. They're sort of these like bottom heavy pieces of wood that sort of, that hole in the ground, that trench, they call that a canoa because often you'll see them kind of carved into tree trunks, and they'll throw large pieces of agave into that canoa, and two people will stand on the edge of it with these bats and sort of do an overhead crushing motion to hand crush the agave. This is an old canoa. This is what I mean when they carve it out of a tree trunk. I always try to sneak a picture of myself in. There I am with Luis Carlos in Santa Catarina, Minas. I like this picture because I'm 5'6". I'm kind of average size, but I hope you can see how big these things are. They are very heavy. This is very labor intensive. And Luis Carlos and his family, they mill this way because that is the tradition of his family and his village. They could obviously update their production practices to do something a little bit easier, but this is what they do. It takes 2 men 8 hours to fill 1 fermentation tank. Next fermentation, this is Rogelio in front of his fermentation tank. These fermentation tanks are important because this is a really big part of our single village methodology, because as you can see, they're open. This is open air fermentation. So that means whatever ambient microbes and yeast are in the air in this village at that particular time are going to fall into this fermentation tank, and they're going to not only make alcohol and carbonation, but also impart flavor. They're going to affect the character of this mezcal. So this is like a normal tina or fermentation tank. They're typically made of wood, but some families will use different materials. The families will put the crushed roasted agave into the fermentation tank and add about 10% local water, which again, no, they do not add yeast. It is all ambient. That's something we see with beer or something a lot, right? Like somebody wants a particular flavor, so they add yeast. What these producers do, instead of directly adding yeast, if somebody wants a really floral note, they will plant flowering trees and bushes near their fermentation tank. Or if they're in a tropical microclimate, they'll have we'll taste some today that are by a grove of mangoes, and you'll taste fruit in this. So instead of directly adding anything, they just let Mother Nature do her job. And this is again like wine, right? So a mezcal, a bottle of San Luis del Rio made in spring might taste different from one made in the fall, and from year to year tastes a little bit different. So we never try to make a consistent flavor. We make sure the quality is consistent, but what we really love about mezcal is how different it can be from batch to batch, and that's part of the fun. Oh, and the local water, right? Again, single village methodology. Whatever the water source is, be it spring, be it river, be it if it's mountain water, if they're in the mountains, whatever it is, the flavor of that water is also going to change the character of the mezcal. So the sort of meats and fibers of the agave is going to sort of rise to the top and create a cap. If you were to taste it at this point, it would sort of taste like a Goes beer or a sour beer. We basically have agave beer, right? If we were to stand next to this and put your ear to it, you'll hear it like bubbling and popping. And these papenqueros are so incredible. They'll sort of like stick a hole and they'll listen, and they can kind of tell where it is in the process just by listening to the bubbles. So we have alcohol, yay. Great. So the next thing we need to do is distill. So distillation, mezcal is traditionally distilled twice, and it usually comes out between 45 and 55% ABV, which is very high. If that doesn't mean anything to you, although probably you all are pros, but just just for frame of reference, your average bottle of vodka is going to be about 40%. So we're typically starting at 45. So just a heads up as you sip, a lot of these are high alcohol. Most mezcal, like traditional mezcal distillation, happens in pot stills. What the material of that still is, so I'm going to read this. If there's no yeast, what converts the sugars to alcohol? There is yeast, but it's this natural yeast that's in the air already. It's from whatever plants and trees and whatever's happening in the air. It's all natural and ambient yeast. So they're not directly adding anything to create a certain flavor profile. They just leave it open for anywhere from 10 days to a month, and whatever yeast is in the air does its job. I hope that makes sense. Like making sourdough bread with your own starter. Yeah, I like that. I don't know, I can't get out of that here. There we go. Okay, so pot stills. So yeah, whatever the still is made of can vary from village to village and producer to producer. But this is a pretty typical still. It's hard to see because you can't really see the still in this picture because it's in that adobe block. But what happens is they put a fire underneath. This is a copper pot still. You see the swan's neck, sort of, which is what we often see with whiskey distillation. And then off to the right, that's going to go into a coil surrounded by cool water. And then we're going to have mezcal. This is another kind of still. This is in Santa Catarina, Minas. These are clay pot stills. So this is ancestral, right? They're distilling in flower pots. This is the oldest style. So again, you can't really see the actual still because they're in an adobe house. But when I say flower pot, I'm not being hyperbolic. Like they're about this big and they literally look like flower pots. So they're inside of there. For lack of a better term, this is what you could call a Filipino style still. But again, this is something that the Oaxacans may have taught the Filipinos and not vice versa, but the jury's still out. But the way this particular still works is that the pot is inside, they're heating it from the bottom, and you can kind of see there's a little bit of an atmosphere, right? There's a tank there, but you see the bowl on top, and you can kind of see that, I don't know if you can tell, but they're putting cool water in that bowl. So what happens is the vapors, the alcohol is going to turn to vapor. It's going to rise. It's going to go through all of this. It's going to hit the bottom of that cold bowl that's filled with cold water. It'll condense, drip back down. And then off to the side, I don't know if you can see what looks like a piece of bamboo. It's basically a spoon that is stuck inside there, and it's got something to catch the mezcal, and then it runs off. So you can sort of see the mezcal running into that yellow funnel. So we're going to taste one of the mezcals that this family produces today. But I just wanted to show you a couple of the different kinds of stills. This is just your average palenque. This is kind of a bigger still, just so you can kind of see the variations. So yeah, between 45 and 55%. I'm going to check this out really quickly. Yes, it is agave pulp on the top of the fermentation tanks. The question was, is that agave pulp around the top? You mean of the still? Yes, so often they'll use the spent agave fibers or even the vinazas, which is sort of this like sediment-rich sort of watery byproduct of distillation. They'll use that to pack their fermentation tanks. They use it just to fill in gaps. Do the clay pot stills produce less distillate than copper pot stills? Yes, they do. If they were equal in size, which they're usually pretty equivalent, the clay of the pot still does leach out liquid, and often they even break, which is really heartbreaking. But yes, I don't have an exact conversion, but yes, it is. This is why clay pot distillation is more expensive. All right. So this is Paciano Cruz, an Alaska, and his son Marcos. Let's go ahead and pour ourselves some Vita if you haven't already. I'm going to take a sip of my cerveza, my giant cerveza. Has anybody, I can just see, I'm going to turn to my gallery view really quickly. Is there anybody that's never had Vita before? like most of you had it. Okay. Oh, a couple. All right, cool. So Vita is our this is our best-selling mezcal for several reasons. Paciano Cruz Nolasco has been working with Del Maguey since 1995. So we have a very long relationship with him. Paciano is an amazing distiller, but even beyond that, he's an amazing farmer. And this is made in the village of San Luis del Rio. San Luis del Rio is at the bottom of a valley on the Red Ant River in Oaxaca. It is a semi-tropical microclimate. There's a mango grove right near these fields and fermentation tanks. We're starting with Vita because it is a lower ABV, and we're going to kind of go from here. So Vita is 100% Espadín. It's that go ahead and smell and taste as we're talking. It is 100% Espadín. It is horse-drawn and electric Molino. Copper pot still. There are smelling and tasting notes on the screen if you would like to use them, but I won't say them just to avoid the power of suggestion. But the history with Vita is that it came out in 2010. So this came out a solid, 15, I'm sorry, what is that? Yeah, 15 years after the company had even started. Everybody, because Vita is so, we see it everywhere now. People always think this was our first, but it came out way later because this was a response to the craft cocktail movement. In the, early to mid-aughts, we saw places like Milk and Honey opening up. Craft cocktails really started to become a thing around the country. People were measuring ingredients. They were using fresh juices. They were paying attention to what they were putting in cocktails. So, bartenders were saying to Ron, we love the mezcal, but we are not, it is 2008. We are not going to sell a $23 mezcal cocktail. Like, if nobody knows what that is, they're not going to pay that. So we can't, it's not a cocktail spirit. So Ron was discussing this with Paciano, and Paciano had an idea. So if you've ever heard of heads, hearts, and tails in distillation, during distillation, the first part that runs is called the heads. It's really high alcohol, has some funky chemical compounds. The center is the heart. Oftentimes it's sort of thought of like as the best of the distillate. If you're looking at any bottle of liquor, that's usually going to be the heart. And then we have the tails, which is sort of, the end of the distillate. It's lower ABV, different chemical compounds. But what Paciano did is he took his San Luis del Rio expression, which is 47%, and just elongated it, left some of those tails in, brought the proof down from 47 to 42. We got more mezcal out of the same amount of agave, allowing us to bring the price down and make it more affordable for people to put into cocktails. So we love Vita. I love Vita on its own, but this one really is sort of built for the cocktail movement. So you want to take a second? Does anybody want to share what they're tasting or smelling? I'll mute for a second if anybody wants to.
So all of these are bottled at the proof they come off the still at. You're not watering them down.
That's correct. We have a saying that it's written on the side of our bodega that mezcal with water is not mezcal, but it's in a.
That's funny. This is really good.
I'm so glad. You all find this? Do we find this one very roasty? Like how are we feeling on the? That's the first thing I look at when I taste mezcal. Like, what is the sort of roast? We try not to use the word smoky because sometimes smoky can kind of connote sort of that fake sort of liquid smoke flavor. So we try to say roasty instead. So how are you all feeling? Feel free to put in the chat too. Are you feeling this one very roasty?
I think so. This is the first time trying mezcal, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, that roasted aroma and flavor. At first, I was wondering if from the little copita, if that had any influence on it. So I put some in the glass to see. But no, man, that I like peated whiskeys and things that way. So this is really interesting. I like the roasted. It's very unique.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I'm looking at the chat. I'm reading what some of you are saying. Like, I love that you're getting banana. To me, this one, that's what jumps out to me on this one. Almost like a green banana for me sometimes. And just a note on I love that you tried it out of 2 different vessels because Vadim said that you guys had jicaras, right? Which is like, a halved gourd or a shell of a certain fruit. These are modeled after jicaras because what we like about it is this wide mouth. when you're tasting something that, or smelling and tasting something that is so high proof, I talked about how the best way to do it. I've had these mezcals served to me in beautiful tequila tasting glasses, right? They're stemmed, but they're tall and long, and they have like, they're really dainty and like very close edges. And I try to smell it and it just kicks me in the face with alcohol. So that's why we love the copitas, because it has this wider mouth for smelling, but also, but you're right, if you really want to kind of get into these, and I would say this for any spirit, I think it's smart to try them out of different glassware and different vessels, because if you were to lick your copita right now, it does have a little bit of a flavor. So that is a good thing to kind of keep in account. We prefer it out of this, but it definitely does change the character. I'm having a little bit of trouble with my cursor. Sorry, y'all.
The one thing that I noticed was, my first response was, this tasted very earthy, and I thought it was the clay from the copita coming through, and I did exactly what Shane did, and I put it in a glass, and it still has that earthy clay. It's very good.
Good. I agree with you. And it says, it looks like a lot of you are like, yeah, it's roasty, but not too much. And that's exactly what we wanted for our first cocktail grade mezcal, because, we want it to have enough roastiness, enough character that it stands up to, the ginger or the, pineapple or whatever else somebody's putting this in a cocktail with. But we also don't want it to be completely overwhelming. So just, I think Paciano did an amazing job of sort of walking that line. This was the first mezcal I ever had. I had this when I was bartending in LA back in 2010. I had it the year it came out, and I was just, at the time, I was like, whew, like, what is this stuff? I thought it was so smoky. But I started to catch your name, who was talking about Scotch over here, but it's true. You kind of, you may have had this experience where you kind of develop a palate for it. I almost feel like I'm smoke blind at this point now. Like I can barely taste the smoke anymore. So it's an interesting evolution. So I do feel like if you are okay with heated scotches, mezcal is an easy sort of transition.
And it gets better as you taste it. And I can't say roasted, because roasted to me is a little more savory than this is. It's definitely almost peated, but it's a different kind of smoke, right? It's really, absolutely, and it's nice and smooth too.
Good. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think I get what you're saying about the roasted meaning more savory, and that reminded me of a note that I wanted to mention back when we were talking about the actual production process. I like to talk about tequila too, because I think all of us have a very good understanding of what tequila is. So I like to use that as a reference point, talk about why mezcal is different. So one is the agave itself, right? Like tequila is only Blue Weber, mezcal can be anything. 2, where it's from, the DO, 9 states for mezcal, 5 for tequila. But the other is the cooking process, right? I was talking about the roasting process is what gives mezcal that definitive character that we're talking about. But by contrast, I didn't mention this, but the way that they cook tequila is they'll often cook it above ground in masonry ovens, or they'll use some shortcuts like basically microwaves, autoclaves, or they'll use steam often. So when you talk about savory for roasting, I'm so glad you said that, because I often talk about, I compare it to broccoli, right? If you're like a healthy dish for lunch and you steam your broccoli, it breaks it down and makes it soft, but it's a very neutral cooking process. You're not imparting flavor. That's tequila. That's why tequila is light and grassy. But if you were to roast that broccoli, that's definitely it, right? Especially if you use like a specific wood or whatever the style is, that's not a neutral cooking process. So that's kind of the big difference in the production of the actual cooking of the agave.
What's the, I guess, the time from cutting the plant to bottling?
That's a great question. And that really varies from producer to producer and village to village. So this plant, we'll start there. So 7 to 12 years before it even reaches maturity. Depending on how they're harvesting, like often these plants are growing on like the side, like hillsides. You can kind of see some of them in these images here. Is my chat in the middle of all of your streams? Am I just blocking everything, or am I the only one seeing that?
You only see your own
just
chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Great. So hopefully you can see here, this is a very hilly area. So they don't have it down off of the mountain to take days. The roast is usually, I mean, that's another one that depends. It depends on the time of year. We have some producers that will leave the roast underground for 3 days, and we have some that will leave them underground for 28 days. So that just depends on that producer and his style. Fermentation can take anywhere from, again, 7 days to about 3 weeks. How hot is it? What time of year is it? Like all these things, is there rain? All of these things matter. But then the distillation is probably like one of the fastest parts. That only takes, maybe 2 days. But it's a long process. Even the shortest, even the most efficient producers, it takes quite a long time.
Because it looks from the cutting of the plants to the wheel, pulling the mule, it looks very labor intensive. So I was kind of wondering.
I'm glad you said that. And it is, I think some people that don't understand the process, sometimes they balk at the price of mezcal, but it should be expensive, right? This is so much effort and so much time and so much labor. So I'm really glad that you noticed that. It is. Shall we go on to our next? Can Vita taste different year after year, or is it always consistent? Yes, it can taste different from year to year. Again, we try to make sure the quality is consistent, but we celebrate the variations in seasons and year to year. Like they didn't stop producing, I should say the family in San Luis del Rio didn't stop producing during the pandemic, during 2020. So we're just now kind of getting those batches of Vita in. And the 2020 Vita is incredible. And I think that's probably what you're drinking. And how do they identify the batch? So if you look on the side of a bottle of Del Maguey mezcal, say you're looking, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. So we're gonna do San Luis del Rio next. Again, Paseado and Marcos, same family. So if you were to, actually, let me go back. If you were to look at the side of this bottle, you would see SLR, which is San Luis del Rio. And for example, you might see 173. So what that tells me is that is the third batch from the year 2017. Or you'll see 201. That's the first batch from 2020. So that's how we identify them. It's kind of a little bit of a code, but if you kind of get like super nerdy about this, there are like online forums and everything that track the batch numbers. It's fun. Let's go ahead and let's pour ourselves some San Luis del Rio. If you haven't already. I know that's different than the way Vadim laid it out, but I did want you to try these two next to each other because they're from the same place and by the same family. This is probably a better, and when I was talking about the time it takes to harvest them, this is sort of a better picture of the harvesting, right? So you can see that this is a pretty steep hill. You can see one of the family members harvesting the plants there, and that's one of the burros where they'll load him up with a bunch of piñas. They use the coas and everything. They cut the pencas off right there in the field, and then they just load the hearts up. So San Luis del Rio. This is not going to be a lot of new information for you, based on what we just talked about, because we call this Vita's big sister. It's her predecessor. This is the original. This came out in 1995. This is a typo. I made this today, and I apologize. This came out in 1995, and it is the same production notes as Vita. It's 100% Espadín, San Luis del Rio, all the semi-tropical microclimate. Everything's the same except the proof. Proofing in mezcal is really important. Mezcal really presents differently based on the ABV. So this is the 47% alcohol by volume. Sorry, I'm just reading the question here. As opposed to Vita's 42. The question is, you say the quality stays consistent. What factors, ABV, purity, are you considering to determine quality? Honestly, it's pH and acid. The only times that I've ever seen Steve Olson and Ron Cooper reject a batch is if somebody buys agave and we can only trace it to maybe the agave being too young. It has like a funky sour quality. And also if it hasn't rested long enough, if the mezcal itself hasn't rested long enough, it can taste really wild and really acidic. Even though these are only aged in glass, the glass resting is really important. So they do, at the bodega in Teotihuacan de Valle, they actually, they obviously will they'll test it for ABV, they'll test it for certain things, they test the pH. But honestly, the pH, that's, to me, I think is the biggest factor. And also we have to test the furfural and methanol levels because that's a legality thing. I hope that answered your question. That was sort of a long answer to a short question. Has everybody tasting this one? If you haven't already, please do. Any thoughts?
Definitely a lot of that cigar smoke tobacco flavor, and it started sweeter and more silky and smooth in the beginning, but it finished more spicy for me than the Vita.
Yeah, I think those are good notes.
And what's the difference in terms of what qualifies as San Luis Del Rio versus the Vita?
It's just the proof. It's where they cut it. It's where Paciano decides to cut
Okay,
it.
so it's just okay.
That's all it is. Easy as that. I'm gonna.
So a narrower cut then.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Okay, this is interesting. Shane said this is higher proof but less bite, more smooth. And I agree. To me, that, and we're gonna taste some high proof. We're gonna taste even higher proof stuff tonight. And to me, that is the mark of not only a good producer, but like that's a good spirit, right? If somebody can make something this high proof, taste this soft, that is a skill, right? So I'm glad you said that. Any other thoughts or feelings about the San Luis Del Rio before we move on?
Jennifer, are you going to talk about later if in general the fact it looks like all of these are unaged, at least from the color, versus no wood aging?
Let's talk about it. Let's do it now. Great observation. So yeah, if you look at these, they're all clear, right? And you are professionals. Like, you all know that anytime a spirit, any of these spirits, when they show color, it's from oak aging. So legally, in the denomination of origin, which is not just the geography, but also a list of laws that govern what mezcal can be. Legally, you can put mezcal in an oak barrel and age it and call it a reposado or an añejo or an extra añejo. You can do that, but it is not traditional, because if we think about Oaxaca 500 years ago, there wasn't easy access to oak barrels. That was not the done thing. It was not. They were aging it in either glass or clay underground. So also, why do people even age spirits, right? It happens sort of by accident at first to round out the edges, right? If you have like not a well-made spirit, if you put it in an oak barrel, you can soften it up and add some, caramel and vanilla and make it really nice. We also don't think these need that. We've done it sometimes. If we get a really cool barrel, we have friends from, different walks of the industry, different kinds of spirits. So we put some in. We had some Pappy Van Winkle barrels that we put like 4 expressions in each. We put 1 expression in 4 different barrels. We had like a sherry barrel that we put some Santo Domingo Alvarez in. We have some stuff coming out soon that was in some Weller barrels. So we do it occasionally if we have a really cool barrel, and they're very expensive. But for me, I still prefer them unaged. Let's see if there's any questions here. A lot more alcohol off the copita. That's interesting.
Only had 1 ounce in my bottle, but then.
That's a good sign. I like that. I like the one thing more. All right, let's this is a new family for us. We only started working with them a couple of years ago. We don't have the same kind of long history with Piano, but when Ron and Steve met Anastasio and tried his mezcal, like we want to work with you. So we have not added a 100% Espadín to this tier in the Del Maguey line in a very long time. You can kind of see, so there's a couple of interesting things about what they do. If you look in that picture, if you look past the still, you can sort of tell that this palenque is kind of high on a hill, right? We're sort of overlooking. On the other side, kind of behind us and beyond, you'll see cornfields. So if we're thinking about open air fermentation, like look for corn as you taste this. They Molino mill. You can see they're very like rustic looking Molino there. And then this is another unique thing about this palenque. If you look at the horno or their roasting pit on the side over here, What's unique about this one is that they didn't dig it into the earth. You can sort of see it best on the right side. They're so high up, it's not loose dirt there. It's granite, it's solid rock. So they had to carve their Orno into this granite hillside. So look for that as you smell and taste this. Look for that, you know, minerality and slatiness. This is 46% ABV, so it's a little bit lower than the San Luis Del Rio, but still very full-bodied, still very, I guess, foolproof rather.
This is totally different than the other two. It's a lot less sweet.
I find this going to be very dry myself.
It's silky though.
Very savory.
One might say roasted.
You get a lot of that minerality out of this one for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And what I love about this is like we're still in Espadín, right? Like this is still the same plant. This is just made in a different region by a different family. So this really speaks to the terroir, right? And that single village methodology. I love these first few back to back because it really can just show you what Espadín can be. And what we do with Del Maguey by naming these bottles after their village is like, this is the signature, this is the flavor of this particular place.
Which reminds me almost of like a citrus finishing salt you might put on something, like in a really pleasant way, in the way that you would use that to brighten something up, but it's just that in glass.
I'm so curious to hear what y'all think of this one, because again, this one's sort of new for us. Like I haven't been presenting this one for, you know, all these years like I have the other. This one is, we're still learning what people think of it. I love this one, and it sounds like a lot of you really like it too. So that is the thing. All right. Chat, see if there's any questions here. A lot of I like this one. All right, let's move on. I'm coming up on my hour here. Minero. Go ahead and pour yourself a little Minero. Just a heads up before we even start talking about this one. This is 50% ABV. This one's very high. So just, you know, we always say sip it, don't shoot it. This is Luis Carlos and his clay pot still. The clay pot stills that I was showing you earlier, having the spoon and the bowl and everything. These are his stills. This is also who I was hand milling agave with. This is another one. We started working with his father in 1996. This is where I got it flipped. This was 1996. His father, Don Lencho, passed away about 2 years ago, but Luis Carlos has been distilling in his father's place for probably 15 years now. And this, you know, that's the thing about distillation in these families. Often it's something that's passed down from generation to generation. Kind of historically, a lot of people in Mexico have looked at mezcal the way that we here in the United States might look at moonshine. You know, they look at, they're like, oh, that's what the farmers drink. Because it is. The farmers they're growing agave and then they're distilling at home because there's not a liquor store around the corner, right? And this is like the tradition of their family. This is mezcal something they drink for special occasions. So Luis Carlos is a 5th generation distiller in the exact same spot in Santa Catarina Mina. This one, so this is an ancestral, right? Like what makes this, there's basically 4 distinctions of Palenque that you can have based on how traditionally you're making something. Like the entry level is industrial, right? Industrial mezcal, but the top tier is ancestral. And what makes Luis Carlos's Palenque ancestral is the hand milling and the clay pot distillation. This is 8 to 12-year-old agave. We're still doing Espadín. This one, we were talking about yeast earlier. This is a producer that specifically plants flowering trees and shrubs near his fermentation tanks. He wants more florals in his mezcal, so hopefully you can find it when you're tasting.
This is good.
Salinity, yes, I love that. Oh, okay, good. Thanks, Jordan. Sounds like I don't have to wrap up in 60 minutes. That's awesome.
Yeah, Vadim should have told you that.
No, that's great. I just wanted to make sure I'm not keeping everybody.
Yeah, no, our record is like 5 hours. I'm not saying you have to beat that today, but like,
right.
No worries.
I am going to a baseball game later. Maybe I'll take y'all with me. We'll all go watch mezcal. Palenque for Shane is the site of distillation. It's basically, we really like the word distillery because it doesn't really feel applicable. You know, I feel when I think of distillery, I think of, you know, a bourbon distillery, right, or something like big and shiny. And that's not what these are. So it's a Palenque, and Patagetto is a producer. What do we think of?
This one is definitely my favorite so far, and the one thing I've learned about myself with this is the second mezcal we've done so far is I tend to like the artisanal mezcals from the clay pots more than I like the ones from copper pots, and this has just reinforced that for me.
That's a really cool observation, and I think it even be like worth like digging into, right? Like, what's the through line for you? Is it that minerality? You know, is it that often they're high, like really high ABV? I think that's really cool, though. I like.
Now we need a couple more to prove that theory, Sean.
Bring it on.
Look, we have 20. If y'all, I will come back.
I saw like 20 bottles, right?
I'm down to do this again. We can just start over.
It's interesting at 50%. I don't get any heat on my palate, but I do get a little bit of that, like, you know, what you call like a Kentucky hug. You know, you get that like warm embrace, which it's really lovely, and it's rounder and softer, and maybe the honey note you see there is giving it that versus the salinity of the other ones. But very different, but very good in its own.
So far, these have all been Espadine.
Yes, they've all been Espadine, which just to tell you a little story about Espadine. This is kind of, I'll tell you the story, then I'll tell you how I feel about it. But there's a group called the Mezcalistas, and they host an event called Mexico in a Bottle. They have a blog that's very unbiased. They're sort of they're educators on mezcal as a category, they're not brand related. And I went to a blind tasting with them, and you know, we didn't know what was in it. They gave us sheets to we had to guess, what's the agave, how is it milled, what is distilled, where is it from, do you know who this producer is? Basically every single thing you could, you know, guess about a mezcal, we were supposed to kind of fill this in, and then they graded us, and it, you know, and I drink mezcal every day, right? I feel pretty confident in my understanding of how different mezcals taste and different agaves. So I was looking, you know, I was like, okay, this one might be Espadine and clay. This might be Tobola. Wow, this one tastes like a Sotol. I don't know. I was just kind of all over the place, and because they all tasted so wildly different. And then we got to the end and we were grading it, and every single one of those 12 mezcals was an Espadine, and none of us got it. And I loved that because it was just such a good lesson in Espadine. I think people kind of scoff at Espadine as sort of like the common agave. It's the most commonly used, but it is a beautiful agave because it can express itself in such different ways depending on how you're using it.
Well, and that brings up one of the things. I've done a few mezcal tastings with some other groups, and the question that's gotten asked a few times is, if you were to do a blind tasting of mezcals and you had, say, 5 mezcals from one Palenque that were all different agave varieties, and you had 5 mezcals from 5 different Palenques that were all Espadine, what would be more similar? I.e., is there a house style that would come through in the 5 from the same Palenque that would make you be able to identify those? Or would you be able to be like, oh no, these are all different Palenques, but they're all Espadine, I can tell?
So that's a great question. I love that question. The only way that I can answer that is that for me, it's easier to tell the signature of the producer of the Palenque. Like, for example, Steve Olson will send us like blind tasting stuff we've never had before. He's one of the partners at Del Maguey. And I tasted one, and I was like, this is not one of ours. I've never had this before, but this tastes like Rogelio in Santa Maria Alvarado. He's like, this is Rogelio. I could not tell you what that agave was. I didn't know. Right. I didn't know anything about like this is Rogelio's mezcal. And that's kind of an intangible, isn't it? But once you really start to kind of get to know these producers and know their signatures, I think I'm glad that that's what you all decided on too, because to me that's the most sort of telling thing.
Yep.
Let's see. Oh, viscosity. I love that. Parsley. That looks so good. Okay. Let's move on to Wild Papalome. Give you a second to pour your copita.
Vadim, do we want to do a photo? I think it's the last one.
Jen is running through these samples. I get it. You're at a restaurant. You wanna get out of there. Let's do let's
You
take
could
a
probably,
let's take a
you could probably do
It's like
this.
I was like yelling at the table by myself, like.
You could do this, Jordan, without liquid. You can't see.
Jen, do you mind if
You
I
can't see through.
do you mind if I close out the presentation so we can see everyone?
Oh, not at all. Here, I'll stop
Just
there.
for a second. Yeah, just for a second. Perfect. Yeah, I know you're not at home where you'd be more comfortable, but we want to take a second and we appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time for setting us up with this amazing lineup today. I know for one, I'm enjoying this, and I think everyone else in the group is as well. So everyone that's here, please hop on your camera, turn on your camera, grab a glass, pour some delicious mezcal in it. And smile and say thank you to Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. I know this took us a couple months to organize, and I'm glad we did. And I know this is part one of many. You definitely got to tell everyone about your Pechuga and your Iberico, because that was absolutely fantastic. We got to talk about that at the end. But raise a glass. Cheers. Smile. Got it.
Got it.
Yep. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. All right, we're gonna finish out strong here with some papalome. I saw that somebody was like, "This is amazing," and I agree. Wild papalome is amazing.
It is.
So we're moving. This is a different region of Oaxaca. So everything that we've tasted so far has been like from the Valles Centrales region. This is going to be Mixteca Alta region. I did not finish my slideshow today because I was like, I'm running out the door and my GPS was picking up and up and up on time. So I'm sorry I don't have any photos here. I'm sorry this slide is so boring, but this is 45% ABV. So we're kind of dipping down now. In fact, I'm going to stop share so we're not just staring at basket weaving. So wild papalome, the word for this agave, so this is a totally different agave, right? So espadín, if you drive through Oaxaca, or if you look at like Vadim's background, right, and you see like these beautiful rows of agave in a field, that's going to be espadín. But the other sort of big category of mezcal is wild, or we call it the Silvestre series. So these are agaves that are harvested from wherever they grow naturally. Is because often they're older, they're more rare. The soil, they'll often grow at like higher elevations. They work harder to stay alive. They're not getting any help. So this is just a totally different character for mezcal. The word papalome comes from the Nahuatl word for butterfly. And I think I heard that before I ever tasted this mezcal. So I think I had in my head that this was going to be this like pretty light mezcal, and it is not that. Even though it's only 45%, which again in our world is pretty light, this is a big boy. Maybe you can still see. If y'all want me to read the notes to you, I'll just say them really quickly. We can come back to them. So the nose, we have leather and herbs. It's deep and dark. Steve Olson says this mezcal is like sinking into a deep leather chair. And the palate, we have leather, plate, black olive meatiness, dark cherry, and savory mushroom. I always say this mezcal is almost like a charcuterie plate. You get that like kind of salty meatiness, you get savory notes. What's also interesting about this palenque, they're still, we've seen copper pot stills, we've seen clay pot stills. This still has 3 different materials. It's got a galvanized steel body, and then bamboo tubing, which we've seen on the clay pot stills, and then a clay condensing coil. So we have 3 materials on one still. It's just kind of a super funky one, a very small palenque, very rustic, but just a really fun mezcal. This one sort of flies under the radar in our lineup because I think people just don't know what it is. So I wanted to add something to our tasting tonight that was really unique. And I think this one is that. What do you all think?
By the way,
that's the easiest drinking of the night so far, I would say, without using the word smooth.
Right.
Just reading your notes over here. These are so good. Oh, I love this. Yeah, the black olive is so spot on, right? And that salinity. I just think this one is so cool. It's just a really unique mezcal.
Yeah, I'm not sure which bourbon, but this reminds me of a bourbon.
I love you said that, because we often will challenge ourselves to that. So somebody says, I don't like mezcal. And, my job is to sort of ask, well, like, what do you drink? And if somebody says bourbon, I know that this is one of the ones that I can offer them, and they'll probably like it, right? There's a through line in there. Well, I'm loving seeing what you all are
This is
liking.
almost like the tapenade without that extra kick of the vinegar. Got that super creamy, olivey flavor.
Awesome note. Absolutely. Funky in a good way. Yeah. I love this. Well, as we're tasting, do y'all have any? Oh, let me just touch on one other thing since I've got you, and then we're not in a super rush before I start taking questions. Sustainability, right? That is something that we hear a lot in the mezcal world, and we as a company have been around since 1995, and we're the #1 stop selling mezcal brand. So all eyes have kind of been on us for a long time to create an example. To do things the right way because it's right, not because it's the way to sell mezcal. So we've never talked a ton about what we do sustainability wise, but I just want to tell you about a couple of things we're doing, because now it is at the forefront of people's minds, which is awesome. I love that people care about this. So, when we look at sustainability as a company, it's not just the horticultural sustainability of the agave, which is important because obviously these take many, many years to reach maturity. We need to replant several for everyone that we harvest. The category is growing. So we need to make sure we're not, the danger, not just of the environment of overharvesting, is also for the families with which we work, right? If we overharvest, all of a sudden we strip them of their resources and they can't make money next year and the year after and the year after. So it's really important that we don't do that. So we just sometimes we might run out of papalome, we might run out of tobola, but it's because each producer operates as his own independent business, and he tells us how much he will sell us. We do not put in an order, because as a community, these villages are used to taking care of their own sustainability, that they've been doing it for decades or more.
And you say it takes 12 years or so for a plant to get to maturity?
8 to 12 for the espadín, right? So I didn't mention it, but the papalome takes 10 to 12 years. So it's a little bit older even. It starts a little bit older.
And some wild varieties take up to like 40 years, right?
Yeah, like a tepestate. I love this poll. I'm not going to participate though. They're all my babies.
We all have a favorite child.
So it's not.
You can vote. We
horticultural
can tell
sustainability,
anyone.
but we also look at. That's really funny. All right, I'll do one.
All right.
It's also like sort of political and financial and cultural for the families with which we work. But a couple of our sustainability initiatives is we have a nursery for agave, obviously, and for reforestation for the trees that are cut down for the wood at the bottom of these fires. So we're replanting trees as well. We have an apiary project. We have 3 villages now that have apiaries, which are really good for pollination of the plants, but also they create a secondary source of income for the families, and it's also an alternative to the processed sugar that's often found in the diets of a lot of these remote villages. Like they only have access to really processed foods a lot of the time. And we have a talking dictionary that's preserving the teaching of the Zapotec language, which we see disappearing as more and more people are learning Spanish in the rural areas. We have a food security program that's really cool. We partnered with Heifer International to basically send infrastructure and trainers to each village where they would give 20 families 12 chickens each, teach them how to bring the chickens up to where eventually, whatever it is, a month later, they now have egg-laying hens. And then that group will go to the next village and do the whole program all over again. So we're creating food security. There's several others. And we also have the one big thing that we are doing that nobody's done before that we're still trying to figure it out. That's the thing about being the first one to do this, right? Nobody's ever done this in mezcal. So we're just figuring it out. We're trying not to necessarily go the way that tequila has gone in a lot of ways, but innovate new solutions for some of these problems. So waste remediation is a big thing. So the vinasas that I was mentioning earlier, that are sediment-rich watery byproducts. Gabe Bonfanti, our sustainability director, has created a system that separates the sediment from the water. The sediment gets pressed and turned into foundations for buildings that's basically earthquake proof, very, very sturdy. And then the water gets filtered. And because like San Luis del Rio, where we make vida, is on a river, you know, we've tested the water, and it goes back into the river. So we've tested the water above the Palenque, at the Palenque, and downriver of the Palenque, and we were super excited to learn that the water downriver of the Palenque, after we had done our filtration system and put our vinases back in the river, was cleaner than it was upriver of our Palenque. So it's processing so much, it's actually cleaning more water than we're taking out. So it's really cool. Thank you. So yeah, we just have a lot of those things. I just say that so hopefully you understand that this is a brand that you can feel good about purchasing. Again, every single producer works as his own independent business, and they just sell us their mezcal. We've never had a family leave for 25 years, 26 years. All of the families have continued to work with us. Oh, you know, Heifer, that's really awesome. Oh, the BAT project. So yes, we do participate in that. The BAT project, somebody else may have said this to you all before, but bats are one of the main pollinators of agave. So protecting and encouraging, you know, reproduction within the bat populations is a really big deal for agave spirits. So yes, we do donate we work with the same one that Sombra works with.
Right,
Are there any questions for me?
The BAT project is the one where it's you let 5% of your agave mature and flower. Is that the right one?
That's part of it, yeah. So we actually even do more than that, because, you know, so the reason that is, right, so often mezcal producers are not going to let their agaves flower because, you know, it takes a lot of energy for that plant to send up a stalk and a flower, and they want that energy inside of the plant because that energy is what's going to become fermentable sugars, better mezcal, right? So once it would start to send up that quiote, they cut it off. But that's really bad for natural reproduction, right? So basically, I think we encourage them to let every third one flower, which is a big sacrifice, especially in a field of espadín, right? But it's really, really important to the category as a whole and for the longevity of this category. But yes, it's about letting them flower, and also with the apiary project, it's all kind of tied in to encouraging and promoting natural cross-pollination.
Awesome.
I've got a question for you. So
sure.
Again, circling back to my favorite thing, which is apparently the artisanal mezcals. I noticed the artisanal that we did today is a higher ABV than the rest of them. Is that related to the clay pot distillation and all of that, or is it just a personal choice for the?
So it's a great question. So it's a hard question because Minero used to be lower ABV. When I first started with the company, it was 49%. And I think before that, it may have even been 48%. So we're going to get nerdy for a second. We're going to go deep. So
we do. We've been waiting all night.
Is the regulating body. The Consejo is the regulating body for mezcal. They're the ones that, you know, enforce all those laws in the DO, and they're the ones that certify it as a mezcal. A lot of power there, and as this category grows, there's a lot of money there. And they're, you know, they're trying to they're finding a new leader for the Consejo right now. It's really, really corrupt. Mexican politics get kind of ugly, you know, so it's really in flux at the moment. But what we've seen happen is as brands get bigger and bigger, there's more money and they have more influence on what the Consejo is doing. So a couple of years ago, I mentioned earlier in this presentation, I said the words furfural and methanol. Furfural and methanol are natural byproducts of mezcal production. If consumed in very large quantities, like, you know, 5 bottles of mezcal, they can kill you. But the thing is, like, you would have alcohol poisoning before you would ever get killed by furfural and methanol. However, the knowledge that for those chemicals alone can hurt you, we saw really big industrial mezcals pressing the Consejo to create a new regulation that limited the amounts of furfural and methanol that can be found in your mezcal. Why? We interpreted that as a way to sort of squash smaller producers that do what we do, and, you know, sell this product based on the stories of these people in the tradition, right? Because there's a few ways that you can bring down your furfural and methanol levels. The first way is to add water, which I've mentioned we do not do. The second way is to add detergent, which we're absolutely not doing. And the third way is to adjust your cut, because that furfural and methanol is found in different parts of that cut. So with each palenque anybody that was kind of hovering at that new rule, at that mark, we had to figure out something creative that protected the integrity of the process. So what Luis Carlos figured out to do in Santa Catarina Minas is if they adjusted the cut, if they made it stronger, it got those levels to where they needed to be. So that is why, so Minero, no, it has not always been 50%, but now it is to make sure that we are abiding by this new law that we think is not cool, but it's there. Oh, okay. This is a great question. There's a San Luis del Rio, like we had, and then there's Azul, and then there's SLDR Azul, and then SLDR Maracuche. The difference in those three, they're all from San Luis del Rio. They're all made by Paciano and Marcos, but they're all different agaves. So the San Luis del Rio Classic is Espadín. Azul, meaning blue. That one's actually Blue Weber. That's a cool one. If you see that one, buy it because it doesn't exist anymore. That came from, in the early aughts, we saw tequila get really popular really fast. And because agave takes so long to reach maturity, they started like harvesting it younger and younger. It's super problematic, still is. But what we saw is some of the producers in Jalisco come over to Oaxaca to buy Espadín, even though legally you're not supposed to put Espadín in your tequila. They're trying to keep their heads above water. So when they came to Paciano to buy some of his Espadín, because he has so much and he's such an amazing farmer, as part of the deal, they brought baby Blue Webers. So they planted a field of baby Blue Weber in San Luis del Rio, but there's basically only one field. So when when they started to reach maturity, which again, kind of do at different rates, Paciano was like, let's roast it. Let's make some mezcal. So even though it's Blue Weber agave, because it's roasted and because it was grown and made in Oaxaca, it is classified as a mezcal. So that's what the Azul is. And then the Maracuche is a Karwinski. That one's Marcos's. So Marcos built a palenque across the river from his father in San Luis del Rio, which is pretty incredible. He's an amazing distiller in his own right. He assists with Vida. He assists with San Luis del Rio. But Maracuche, that was his first one that he wanted to do. That's his baby. The Maracuche is a tall, cylindrically growing agave. Because they grow tall, they basically have the trunk of a tree, and that's the heart. That's their piña, and it has a really tight, fibrous structure. So the Karwinskis, you often get like a really dusty flavor, but that's all same place, same people, just 3 different agaves.
So if we find the Azul, we should get that one.
Yes, it's delicious, and it's we're not importing anymore as of now. We're out in California, so if you see it out on the shelf.
I just shared a link of. I'll let Damone finish ordering his, and then I can share the link.
Right.
I'll be respectful. Everyone saw the link I shared earlier.
There might be.
Right. I'm only ordering 2.
Total Wine. I'm sorry, not Total Wine. Yeah, it is Total Wine. Total Wine and More. If any of you live near one of those, I think they might still be running a special on the ones that are. We're calling them our last call expressions, the ones that are no longer going to exist. And that's the Azul, one called Espadín Especial, and San Pedro Ceviche. So if you want to check those out, I think they're running them at like $20 off, maybe still. So it could be worth looking at.
Definitely. Thank you. So everybody voted on their favorite. Do you want to take a guess of, having gauged this crowd, what you think our favorite tonight was?
Is it for me to guess?
Yeah.
Yep.
You're the professional.
Okay. Based on what everybody said, I'm between Las Milpas and Papalome, but I'm gonna go Las Milpas.
Interesting. Good call. You ready for the results?
Yep. I was gonna say Monero. Papalome got
Wow.
what?
This is so cool and so interesting.
Right.
Wow.
So, for anyone playing along at home, this is the first time the brand representative guessed the one that got the least amount of votes. Las Milpas got 0.
Y'all were loving it.
Wild Papalome got 7 and was number 1. Monero was number 2 with 6. San Luis del Rio was number 3 with 3, and Vida was number 4 with 2, and Las Milpas was number 5, 5th place.
Don't forget, Jennifer, the other thing is, in general, with this and other groups, the higher ABVs, right? It's typically, which is why I would have guessed Monero for us, but the Papalone was different. And that was actually my other question, follow-up, which is just, what is it you guys are doing, if anything, in terms of getting sort of the natural proof unwatered down, maybe sort of like a single bottled, single, whatever you want to call it, run mezcal, maybe bottled. Is that like a thing you're ever going to do, or is it really depend on the mezcalera and what they do? Or
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood. I think I didn't understand the question. You mean like a single? Sorry, what? Will you repeat that?
Well, so like, with Scotch, right? It's single cask strength, right? You take one, cask, you bottle it cask strength, don't water it down. What's like the equivalent with mezcal? Is that something you guys are doing, have looked at, thought about, considered?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't do that because we want, like, it's supposed to be high proof. It's basically, this is part of the skill, right? We bottle it where the patanqueros cut it. The way that they know where to cut it is it's this really incredible process where it's, an ancestral process, right? They'll take something called a bigasso, or it looks like a piece of bamboo. It's kind of just like a big, natural straw essentially. And they'll take their jicaro, which often they're really big, like a bowl, and they'll suck up some of the mezcal into their straw and like cap the end of it, and then they'll drop it into their jicaro. And this is where the term Las Perlas, if you know that bar in LA, this is what this comes from, is they can tell by how many bubbles there are and how quickly they dissipate what the ABV is. So we don't add water, we don't mix it, we don't do anything. We leave it to the patanqueros to cut it. That's because that's their style, right? That's how they want it to be. We don't do anything to it afterwards.
Yeah, I think you mentioned.
So has there been sorry, I was just saying, has there been any discussion with them about like, cutting it at higher proofs or no?
Well, or lower. So we actually have a new Vita coming out because of July 1. If you see something called Vita de Muertos, with a little skeleton on it, that's Paciano's higher cut of Vita. He makes an expression for Dia de los Muertos for his village that is a 45% Vita. So we've asked him to start selling that to us as an in-between, right? So it just depends. Like, so we often the proof that we're selling them at is the preferred proof of the producer. Like, we have one producer named Rogelio. He makes 4 of our expressions, and they're all at around 45 or 46%. That's just what he does,
Okay.
So it just depends. I have to wrap up. I'm sorry. Are there any other questions before I let y'all enjoy the warmth of your mezcal buzz?
Jane?
Oh, I'd put it in the chat. I don't know if you saw it. I'd love to get more info on the BAT project when you have like 5 seconds free. So.
Sure. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So any of you, please feel free to reach out to me. And I love to talk about stuff. And Shay said, what are some of your favorites? Oh, Shane, that's a hard question because I would say whatever's in my cup because I just fall in love with each of them. And I go through phases where I'll just get on a kick where I just like obsess with one. I have like one that I don't love, but it's only 1 out of 21, and the rest it rotates. And I know that's a terrible answer. Chichicapa, I always come back to. Tepestate, I keep coming back to, but I love them all. Honestly, they're all special.
You said you only have
Is that a good
21
mom answer?
expressions, but I found 23 on sale at Mission. Are those just some discontinued ones that are still around?
That's because yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's because they're some of the ones that we're calling them our last calls.
And then I found
and I apologize if I missed it. Is it the long nose bat fertilizing the agave? Is that the bat project you're talking about, or something else?
What was that? I'm sorry.
The bat project, is it about the long nose bats who fertilize the agave? Is that like a sustainability thing you guys are working on?
Yeah, that's not one of our main ones. That's something that we partnered with them like several years ago. Because we were actually run for Found Sombra in the very beginning. We were working with them, and that was something that we started doing together. We don't add them anymore. We kind of we're starting to elsewhere. But if you do go to, they're gonna put the website in. Easy, it's delmaguey.com. There is a tab on our website. I think they're calling it blog now, but there's a really great area in there where you can read about all of our, sustainability initiatives, which include things about like cross-pollination and encouraging, the different pollinator populations.
Fantastic. I noticed a mezcal called
Are there
crema.
any other questions?
Is that just a regular mezcal or is that something added to it? Hello?
One is
Sorry, Mike. Can you hear me?
The vapors will sort of, wrap around. It'll cook the chicken because it's super hot inside that still, right? But the chicken is also going to impart flavor. So you get all these beautiful like fruits and spices and savory notes. And they only make that once a year, so that's a really special expression. And then the Iberico is the same thing, except instead of chicken, Chef Jose Andres is friends with Ron Cooper, and he and Think Food Group were down in Santa Catarina Minas, and they're like, oh, Pachuga's delicious. Let's try it with fancy Spanish ham. So they like smuggled in some Iberico, and that's what Iberico is. They replaced the chicken with, the famous black-footed acorn-eating pig, and it's really good.
Pork, bacon makes it all better.
Yep.
Does anyone sell the ham afterwards?
I've seen people eat this stuff, but they, what the family does is anytime they do a pechuga or an Iberico, because it's close to Dia de los Muertos, they actually put the meat, because it's like dense jerky at this point, right? It's super cooked. They actually put it on their family's altar to help honor the previous distillations and the people involved and hope for future distillations that are successful.
Jennifer, I know you got to run, but I got to give you props. We've done like 90 of these, and normally when it's not the owner or master distiller, someone gets stumped at least 4 or 5 times during these, and you've just answered. You just like rocked every question like so fucking hardcore. I just gotta really I'm so impressed with your depth of knowledge of this. Just wanted to say
Thank you. That is so nice. That means a lot. It's an honor to share this with you all. I consider it's my job to represent these families and to convey this beautiful thing that they're doing. So it's an honor. So I really appreciate you saying that. It really does mean a lot.
So before you leave, Jennifer, I do want to do a quick show of hands. If we get Jennifer back here for a round 2, how many people are in? If it's not unanimous, we're not doing it. There we go.
I would be so hurt if somebody didn't raise their hand. I'm so glad.
And I have some Iberico.
There we go.
I saw that. I was like, somebody's holding meat.
And how do you clean this pot?
Great question. I honestly will just soak it and I'll just hand wash it. Don't put it in your dishwasher because a jet will hit it and you'll have broken clay everywhere. So I just gently hand wash it and let it dry out.
You just keep putting mezcal in it. Never let it dry.
It's true. It's like a patina.
Jennifer, sorry, one last question is, so if we want to try a bunch of these different expressions before buying a bottle, where's a good place that you'd recommend for trying some of your mezcals, like in restaurant bar?
Oh, sure. Las Perlas for sure. Are most of you in like South LA? Is that where the majority of you are based? Ish. Okay. Yeah, Las Perlas is amazing. If you go to anywhere in LA, like that would probably be the first place. There's 2 Madres, like one I think in Newport and one in West Hollywood. They have a really good mezcal selection. There's a new Las Perlas opening in West Hollywood. There's, we call them green wall accounts. If you're on the west side, there's a place called the Brig, which seems divey, but they're amazing and they have a great selection.
Redondo.
Madre and Torrance.
Yeah.
Madre and Torrance.
Right on.
Hollywood.
Thanks for the insight.
That's close to you, Vadim.
if Vadim, if you help me remember, I'll put together a little list for you all with options all over Los Angeles and the outlying areas.
Perfect. Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you.
But that's awesome. I hope you all go try this in other places, and I would love to come back so you can just taste them with me.
Yep.
I'm in. Let's do that.
That'd be awesome.
Awesome. I so appreciate you all. Vadim, thank you so much for helping me. Like, you made this so easy on me. So many people make this so daunting, and you made this great. So, and what a great group. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye.